Welcome to Personal Landscapes. I'm your host, Ryan Murdoch. You can find links for today's episode and other conversations on Books About Place at ryanmurdoch.com. If you grew up in the 80s like I did, you know Andrew McCarthy from Pretty in Pink and St. Elmo's Fire. But Andrew's more than an actor and director. He's also an award-winning travel writer. His writing is introspective, vulnerable, and self-deprecating. He weaves memoir with vivid descriptions of people and place, and grapples with questions like how to balance a solitary nature with the desire for intimacy. I reached out to ask him about walking across Spain, a journey he made twice, first alone and then with his teenage son. That's the subject of his latest book, Walking with Sam. I thought he might give me some insights and inspiration as I prepare for a long farewell to Europe trudge. Andrew McCarthy is the author of Walking with Sam, The Longest Way Home, and Brat, an 80s story. He was editor-at-large for National Geographic Traveler magazine and guest editor of a Best American Travel Writing anthology. He's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Travel and Leisure, and many other top publications. He also appeared in dozens of iconic films, including Pretty in Pink, St. Elmo's Fire, Less Than Zero, and Weekend at Bernie's. We spoke about his Brat Pack years, walking the Camino with his son, and how a hike can change your life. Personal Landscapes relies on the support of listeners like you to keep going. Want to keep it paywall-free and ad-free? Please consider joining my members club. You'll support the show and get cool book lover bonuses for what it would cost to buy a fancy coffee once a month. Go to personallandscapespodcast.com to find out more. And don't forget to check out my latest book, A Sunny Place for Shady People. Paul Theroux called it a new kind of travel writing. It's been described as a year in Provence meets The Godfather, and I guess that sort of sums up my life on a small Mediterranean island. Read the book and see for yourself. And now, here's my conversation with the multi-talented Andrew McCarthy. You said that before your first Camino, you saw yourself as someone who never finished anything. But walking across Spain and making it to Santiago changed you into a person who saw things through.
That was such a factor in my life. I couldn't even finish a newspaper article when I was young. And I felt like I suppose it played into the kitchen, the imposter syndrome or something. I just felt insufficient in a certain way to up to the task of certain things. And so I would just abort them unconsciously before I got to the end because I felt either like I wouldn't be able to do it or I was a fraud doing it, I suppose. And, and then that becomes habit. That becomes a self, feeding thing. And that was just I couldn't finish most things that I started. And so then doing the Camino, it did change all that because there was no one, it was just what it was. You had to get there. You had to walk. You had to walk to the end of the day. And I didn't realize that. I didn't realize I was like that until after the Camino because it was such a challenge for me to just keep going. And I so often wanted to quit. And I didn't realize that sort of battling on things right before the end was a habit of my life until it was revealed to me in the Camino once I finished something that, oh, that's why that was so hard for me. I used to toss me the ball on the 5-yard line, not score a touchdown, but I don't want to grind down 90 yards down the field to do it.
Well, you said in your movie memoir, Brat, that you kind of give the impression that you were an intellectual slacker as a kid. Like that, even when it came to acting, you loved the craft, but didn't attend any of your non-acting classes. So is that why it felt like some of those accomplishments were a fluke maybe, or they came too easy? Was it because of those slacker years, self-perceived slacker years?
Well, I mean, I did smoke a lot of pot and I don't know. I suppose it just became that sort of lack of discipline was habit and a way of, that's who I am. That's who I became, or so I told myself, and then when I did, I was kicked out of school after 2 years at NYU and instantly got sort of lucky and won the lottery and within a movie then, but I then also felt like I was undertrained as an actor and not prepared. So I was piecemeal trying to do classes for years. And no matter how many I would have done, I think I would have felt, again, like I was still unprepared and hadn't seen something through until, and I still, I suppose it's like someone who's really obese as a child and I grew up to be thin and beautiful, but they always see themselves as a fat person. I think I still inherently see myself as someone who is prone to doing, not finishing, sloughing off. And, the facts belie that, but my feeling is still that, I think. That's why, we can never see ourselves particularly clearly.
But writing's a bit like that too, right? Like nobody really trains you for that. So you're always sort of figuring it out. I mean,
well, again, that was really not trained for. I mean, I never read a book in high school that I never read Catcher in the Rye. I didn't read, Granny and Zoo. I didn't read any of those books. I didn't write anything in high school. I never read until I, stopped drinking when I was 29. Then I picked up a book, I think, for the first time. I started reading and I went, oh my God, there's a whole world out there. And then, I started writing totally by accident, as well. But something about the writing, though, made me just trust it. I don't care what I mean. I don't care. And as opposed to other things, I think I wanted people to approve and things. And I would certainly like approval because that helps you, that feels good. And if things sell, then you get the chance to do the next one more easily. So, but there was something about the writing that I felt like I had something to say. I had a point of view. And then, I started with travel writing. So I felt like I wasn't the only, nobody was saying what my experience was. All the world's been discovered and all that, but it hasn't been discovered by me. And so all we can do is put our perspective on things. And so I very much trusted my perspective had value. And I don't know why. And I remember one of my first articles I ever wrote for National Geographic Adventure magazine. And I'd been on a trip in Wyoming where someone was killed. And I hiked back into the site where the person was killed and wrote it. It was a really personal thing. And I was invested in it. And the editor just changed everything. And I said, look, I will rewrite to you 1,000 times, but you cannot rewrite me. And he's like, who the fuck do you think you are? I said, I'm just me. And this is my story, and I will rewrite it until you're happy. And I will literally do 1,000 times, but you cannot read the first paragraph, read the sentences. Is there one sentence in that that's similar to what I wrote? He goes, well, they're the same amount of sentences. I remember this one. I said, well, that doesn't cut it. Tell me what you don't like about this, and I will rewrite it. But this is my voice. I realized all I had was my voice, and that's all I had with my perspective. And so I didn't need anything from writing. I did it for fun and for free and for me. And it was a creative rebirth for me when at a time when acting had just sort of dried up in an internal way. I was still getting jobs and stuff, but I didn't find it rewarding in any way because I wasn't doing kind of things that I wanted to be doing. So when I discovered writing by acting, it was a real creative rebirth for me. And I had a lot that built up over 10 years of being a frustrated actor that I put into it. And I wasn't going to let anybody mess it. I realized I didn't know structure of certain things and grammar and all this kind of stuff. And okay, that's stuff you can learn, but you can't take away the only thing I have, and that's my voice. And that I fought tooth and nail for. And as I read, what I'm always attracted to is voice.
So when did you start reading travel writing?
Someone gave me Paul Theroux's book, The Old Patagonian Express, in the early 90s. And so I started reading Paul's books, and they changed my life. Well, those books changed my life. Then I went back and read Great Railway Bazaar and read all of the travel books. And his notion of go alone, go far, go for a long time, get out of touch, don't come back for an extended period of time. That really just made sense to me. And so I started traveling the world like that. When I was a young kid, when I was like 20, I got into movies, and that phase when people should be taking gap years and going off and backpacking, I was making movies. And so it wasn't until I was like 30 when I looked up and kind of thought, wait, I need to, anyway, and that's when I started doing my version of that. And I would just go whenever I wasn't working, go for months at a time alone and using Paul's words ringing in my head. I don't know if he ever said that, but that's what he did. Go alone, go far, don't come back, get out of touch, and so those books really, he changed my life. When I finally got to meet Paul, I said, he changed my life. Well, of course I did, But anyhow, I rant on.
So you said your early travels were connected to your film work. You wrote that because of my natural inclination towards solitude, I drifted away from others after the workday ended and wandered the cities alone. I began to find comfort in the transience and invisibility of being in a strange place, unnoticed and anonymous. That ability to just roam and be a total stranger, and then you're kind of the watcher. everything going on in the background.
Did I write that? I love that. Yeah, that's good.
Not bad, huh? That's pretty good.
Not the writing good, but just the philosophy of that. Yeah, no, to this day, absolutely. There's nothing more exciting than being somewhere far from home and no one knows where I am, and no one knows. I find that really, no matter where I am. There's some places where once is enough, but I mean, I'm like my kids. If I'm not having an interesting experience, I either need a nap or a snack. You know what I mean? But I find, yeah, being far from home and anonymous, and not because I'm within the movies and stuff, but just being like it's a person. I was always very comfortable with myself and my own company. I didn't need it, to a fault. So, what better place to do that than out in the world? When I started travel writing, it was good for me because when you're travel writing, you need quotes. So I'd have to start talking to people. I would go to places in the world and have a fantastic time and realize I hadn't talked to anybody in a couple of weeks. But as you're travel writing, you need quotes. So I'd been forced to engage with people, which was even better, and my natural sort of fear of people and fear of a kind of interaction kept me behind a wall a bit. Even when I did want to reach out to the travel writing, really helped bring me out. Because also I was creating. When you're traveling in your head, you're painting and making a movie, or that's how I approach it, because that's where I came from. You have a role in a movie, and so I need this scene, and I need this scene, and I need this to tell my story that I want to tell. So it brought me out of myself in a wonderful way.
So did you start directing television after travel writing, or was it the other way around?
No, after. I mean, I was full-time travel writing for not that long, 5, 6, 7 years, really concentrated, like all the time. And then travel writing is a fantastic life for a single person. But I think Paul Theroux said something about his advice for a married travel writer would be never whistle while you pack. And don't come home with a tab. Some things I think are very, very true. And but anyways, I was traveling full time, and then my wife got pregnant again with another kid, and it was at that point it was like, yeah, I can't keep doing this. And also, you don't make any money traveling. It's a wonderful life, but you don't make any money. And so I started directing television, which I fell into the way I fell into writing and the way I fell into acting as well. But I realized, and so then I was overlapping, doing them simultaneously, which I still do simultaneously. And but the writing really helped me direct, because in the writing, when you're acting, it's just very subjective. I'm just doing this facet of the story. I'm responsible for this. And when you're writing, as you're embedded in the subjective at times, doing scenes and characters, and then you have to pull back and tell the whole story and be responsible for the story. And so that really helped me with directing, which was you are the grown up in the room and you're responsible for telling the story. But what made me good at it, I was fast. And if you're directing television, the most important thing you can do is fast. If you have an idea, you're working well. First and foremost, you have to be fast. And I was, because my natural temperament did that. And I spent so much of my time on sets that I knew where time was winning. And I was decisive. You have to be decisive. But I would also, you're responsible for the whole story, but you also can go in and get the little micro things and those little subjective moments. And I had the ability to just go in and out of that. And that I learned from the writing. And then the directing would fuel the writing of that too. And then they're constantly feeding each other. It's the same thing, the exact same thing. I always, the travel writing or anything, and the resting, exactly the same.
So you've also got a really good ear for dialogue. Does that come from acting?
Maybe. I mean, I've said so much bad dialogue. I know good dialogue when I hear it, I mean, maybe.
So how do you evaluate good versus bad dialogue?
Well, it has to do at least two things, right? It has to reveal character. It's helpful and propel the story forward, and create an environment. A person from this is going to say this kind of thing. Where again, to quote Paul Theroux, in one of his short stories I remember writing, or his travel account, he was traveling, through the Northeast, where he lived. And the kicker at the end of the article is, yeah, it's wicked good. And that dialogue, I mean, there's no more perfect dialogue, and it's wicked good because that places you instantly. It's a fun kicker. It tells the story, it reveals the character, and it, caps the story. So that kind of economy of that is, genius. I think that's what makes him brilliant at what he does.
Yeah.
The guy said wicked good or not, or whether the guy said wicked good somewhere else in a conversation, that's the art of the writing. He didn't have to have said it there, but Paul put it. Maybe he did say it there. But, that's what people say to me. Go, did it happen exactly like that? I go, well, it happened. I did see an eagle fly by. Did he land on that post at that moment? I can't remember anymore. But there's truth in the essence of that. It's telling the story. So anyway, so dialogue, I feel, is it has to serve those functions. And you can get humor in dialogue. You can get humor. I'm not great at writing funny. Like Bill Bryson's great at writing funny. I can't write funny, but I can pop occasional funny dialogue. Let a character say that. And that I like.
So on that first trip on the Camino, you didn't keep a diary, is that right?
A friend gave me a little notepad before I started, and he said, "You should write down." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I think I did. Like, I'm so lonely, the food's so bad, and it's like after 2 days, I was done with that. But that's before I was writing, But that trip, which was like 93, 94, that's what started me really traveling.
The problem I have with diary writing too is that it can be self-incriminating. In Paul's novel, My Secret History, he says, I stopped writing a daily diary when I realized there were things that I did that I didn't write down. So there's some stuff you just keep to yourself, and the danger that it's out there and somebody can find that unedited, unscripted, where you don't want it to be seen, that bothers me a bit.
That's very him, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe very you. I don't do it for that reason. I find it more self-indulgent than self-incriminating. I do enough to incriminate myself. I just was not very good at it. I liked writing it for, I would write to talk to my 15-year-old self. That's who I'm writing to generally. Trying to illuminate my 15-year-old self. What that.
So is that how you frame your first book and your memoirs in your head as well?
Well, maybe, what's it Joan Didion said, I write to know what I'm thinking. I'm paraphrasing, something like that. I write to know what I'm feeling, to discover, as when you write something down, it becomes the fact. That becomes what happened. So you have to be very careful and very diligent. Well, I discovered this really when I was writing that memoir, Brat. Like I would write, and I've been telling certain stories for years, decades. And when I went to write it down, I went, wait a minute, well, slow down. That's fun raconteuring after, over coffee, after the meal. But is that the truth of what happened? Is that the emotional truth of what happened? Because the minute you write it down, that's it. That's what happened. That's my experience of it. I was once trying to do a movie about a true story of a boating accident that happened off Martha's Vineyard. And I went to interview the guy. And I took it from an article in the New Yorker. Wonderful article, beautifully written. And it was an amazing story of a boating accident and this rescue. And I wanted to try and make a movie of it. So I went to interview the guy who it happened to. And he basically gave me verbatim the article when I interviewed him. But at the very end, he said, to refresh myself, I just reread the article. And that's when I realized, the truth is gone. The truth of that experience is long gone. Now this is the truth, this article, what happened. So anyway, I don't forget what the question was, but that's it. I found one has to really be diligent. If you're look out to capture the truth, you have to be diligent with yourself and rigorous, right? Particularly with things that you think are well-trodden territory.
Yeah, it really changes the telling of a story over and over again, changes your own memory of it so that you start to remember it that way, right? I mean, that's the same thing that allowed the Odyssey or some of these, oral stories to be passed down for generations also shapes our own memories and morphs them and changes them.
Sorry, there's lots of documentation about that. You recall the story and it's raining when you recall it. So the next time you tell the story, it was raining in the story, all those kind of things. I mean, I did once doing a movie. I was asked to do a movie in 1989. So I'm like 26, 27, and by Claude Chabrol, this brilliant French director. And the best director I ever worked with, by far. And he said, he wanted me to play Henry Miller.
Yeah.
Henry Miller was about 45 at the time of when this book took place, Quiet Shades and Clichy. And I said, Mr. Chabrol, I'm 27. Henry Miller was 45. And he said, my dear poor American boy, the truth today is not the truth tomorrow. And I just thought that was some ridiculous French thing to say. And I went and did the movie and had a great time. But the older I've gotten, the more I realized that it's just so true. Truth is just gone. There is no truth. You know, I mean, there are not alternate facts like some people say, but the truth of things constantly changes.
Yeah, from different perspectives in your life too. You look back at events with more experience, more years, and you see it totally differently.
Absolutely. That's the reason I made this documentary recently about my time in the Brat Pack. It's a group of actors in the 80s when I was a young person. And the reason I made it was because my perception of that time has gone 180 degrees from where it began. In my early 20s, when the label, the Brat Pack, was thrown out, I hated it. I felt it stigmatized me and was very damaging to my professional life. Over the course of all these decades, I've come to realize it's one of the greatest professional blessings of my life. And I'm like, how did that happen? Nothing changed except my relationship to those facts. And then I realized, oh, the truth of it now is that was a blessing and a beautiful thing. And that wasn't always the case in my experience. And so I think, that's interesting. I found that,
Yeah, I can see why that label would be a bit of a burden, but I thought you summed up that period so well in this passage. You said, few films had treated the overwhelming, all-consuming power of teenage emotions earnestly, depicted teens with respect for their struggles, or given them a sense of genuine dignity on screen. And I thought that was tremendously valuable. Like, I grew up in the 80s. I saw Pretty in Pink at the cinema. I would have been, what year was that? 85, 86? So yeah, I would have been 14, 15 maybe. I know it's 15, 87, so 14. Yeah. And I mean, for my generation that came of age in the 80s, you reflected ourselves back to us, I think. And no one had done that before. So I've been I revisited those films recently, actually, because I'm writing about something set in the 80s, and I wanted to get my head back in that high school space, and they still hold up.
Well, they hold up, like some of them do, like Pretty in Pink, kind of, I guess. But Breakfast Club really holds up. That's the best one of that era. And but they exactly what you read there. That's what John Hughes was so brilliant at. What Gift was he really respected and honored young people, and it wasn't an act. He wasn't trying to exploit them. He was trying. Movies should be about life and death, urgent things. That's what makes movies. And, that's what all these TV shows about, cop shows and hospital shows. It's life and death. We got to save the patient. And there's nothing more life and death when you're 16 than getting that perfect prom dress. You know what I mean? And those emotions are full on and they are real. And they are, I've got an 18-year-old daughter and she's about to go to prom. Like, it is. Let me tell you something, dude. It's life and death. And that he didn't mock that or, tease that, but honor that. That's why kids today can still, they start, their parents make them watch the damn movies and the kids start laughing at them and going, oh my God, and rolling their eyes. And suddenly, after a little while, they start to be a little quieter. And then by the end, they're nodding their heads going, that's me. The hairdos are silly and the editing's too slow.
The hairdos were great. Come on.
But, those emotions are real and true and honored. And again, it's like traveling. It's like, yes, it's all been felt before, but not by me. And
well, what I think held up with that stuff, like my high school was very different from those. It's small town, kind of rougher, working class, but it was the emotional angst. The high school social classes, that was really accurate. The house parties, the nervousness about sex, the soundtrack, like that was our lives.
Ooh.
So it's pretty cool that you have that as part of your legacy, I think. And I'm glad you've reevaluated it.
Well, and it is like, I guess I must have talked about it in the book. It's interesting is that, I and other members of the Brat Pack and people in those movies have become, the avatars of youth for your generation, for, a certain demographic of a certain generation, because people come up to me and they go, oh my God, Pretty in Pink. I love it. And they all think, and very quickly I realized their eyes glaze over and they're not talking to me anymore. They're talking to themselves and their own youth. And I am the mirror for that. And so they're not even seeing me. They're seeing their own life when they were 16, 17, 18, their life, and there's no more thrilling time than when you're just blossoming and life is just beginning to happen. And you are a blank slate to be written upon and you get to write it. The parents don't get to anymore. And there's no more exciting time than when that. It's like a sunrise. It's just like, oh. and it's gone quick, you know, and we represent that to and people always look back on that moment with just,
You know what else I think it is too? That life changed so much after that.
hmm,
After the analog era, it's like travel, the way travel changed after smartphones, you know, and those last journeys you take in the analog era are totally different. So that was the last time that maybe as a teenager, you could be totally free. Like nobody's tracking you. Your parents don't know where you are. You're out there making your own decisions and taking risks. And it sort of gives a flashback to that freer pre-internet time as well, I think.
that's really true. Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah. Like I've gotten out 360, whatever, and I could see exactly where my kids are. You know, until they make me take it off the phone or they're not going to, you know. But yeah, totally. But now you're traveling. Like, you know, when I first came to Ireland in the 80s, the greatest thing was getting lost. Now you can't get lost anywhere.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. Yeah.
You know, you have to actively get lost, and that's not getting lost. That's making a decision to, you know, there's this wonderful travel writer named Lisa Abend who's writing now about an unplugged traveler. And her whole thing is that she goes somewhere without any internet or any phone. And like that has to be a thing. And it's wonderful. She's traveling out there analog, walking and going, you know, you have a room available, you know, and that has to be an active, conscious thing now is unfortunate for travel, you know. But, you know, there's still ways to get away and get far, but it's hard.
Yeah. So one thing I want to ask you, you said in Brat that actors began to actively avoid making any movie that might be considered a Brat Pack endeavor and helped to kill off the current cycle of youth ensemble movies. So do you think there was room for more back then, like that it might have continued if not for that article?
Sure, that was right at the height of it. The natural thing could have, I mean, it may have gone higher. I don't know how it would continually do it, but things then slowly would taper off in the natural way things do, but it was more abrupt because of, you know, it was a funny, you know, how deep you want to go down this rabbit hole, but I mean, you know, John, you know, Hollywood wasn't about youth any before that then. You know, it's impossible for us to remember to see this now because ever since that moment in the mid 80s, movies have been about an adolescent mentality and adolescent emotionality. You know, all the Marvel movies, whatever, they're kid movies. Like I'm always amazed that grown-ups go to these Marvel movies. I'm like, what is really? Because it's just an adolescent mentality. And they're great, they're fine. But it wasn't always the case. You know, before the early 80s, you know, there was the auteurs and, you know, the French Connection and Godfather and, you know, Apocalypse Now and all these really intense movies were for grown-ups, you know. But somewhere, a couple people made a few movies in the early 80s that suddenly they realized kids are going to these 5, 6, 7 times. Grown-ups go to The Godfather once. Fuck the grown-ups. Let's make movies for kids. And this happened overnight. Overnight, this happened. And the culture changed instantly. And I happen to be among the group of people who were in the right age at the right time with the right clothes and the right look. And we were the ones in front of that. And old Hollywood, because this literally happened like that, hated, like, who the hell are these fucking punks who have not paid their dues, who have done nothing? Who the hell have taken my job? And then suddenly this article comes out that basically, in essence, says that. And they go, yeah. So Monday, I could walk into your office, Mr. Studio Executive, and you go, Andrew, have a seat. What can I get you? What do you want to do? Tuesday, the article comes out. Everybody goes, that's right. That's right. These little fucking punks. And Wednesday, I go into your office and you go, take a seat, Andrew. What can I do for you? I mean, the attitude shifted 180 degrees. And, you know, Brad Pitt once said something. Is when you're out in front of the herd, you're easy poaching. And we were just that first group that was out front. And we got poached. But there was no stopping the tide of that because the kids were still going. The kids loved the Brat Pack and they loved us. But we, you know, so the next group came up behind us and they, you know, there was no stopping it. But that little group was the first one poached. And so we all felt like, wow, I suddenly, like I said to the guy who wrote the article when I interviewed him for the documentary, I said, you know, I suddenly felt overnight like I'd lost control of the narrative of my career. And it was true. If there's a you know, obituary of me in paper, it will be Andrew Brat Pack McCarthy, you know, and, you know, it took me decades to come to terms with the blessing of that. But, you know, no one wants to be labeled and stigmatized, you know, particularly. And so when you're young, when you don't even know who you are yet, And suddenly, and then it was odd for me because I was such a loner, like we've been alluded to before. And I liked everybody, but I didn't hang with them. And suddenly now I'm part of a pack. The irony of that was never lost on me. Like, how the hell am I a member of a pack? I mean, it's just it's so weird. So it was, I forgot even the original question, but it was just an interesting time. And it was what it was, you know?
And nobody wants to be stuck with the with your first hit either. Like I know some musicians that had hits in the 80s, and then everybody still wants to hear about something they wrote in 1987, and they've written 30 albums since then. They want to talk about their current work, so that you can appreciate that somebody likes it, but you don't want to be just only stuck with something you did that was in a time from your life that you can barely remember.
I suppose since I began to do other things that I feel internally good about. I'll never, Liz Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, did an amazing TED Talk years ago. That no matter what I do, my greatest success is behind me. Now, what do I do? And that's absolutely true for me. But and then she went on to talk about creativity and the power of creativity, the necessity of creativity. And it's a beautiful talk. I would recommend. Have you seen it?
No.
Oh, it's great. You should watch it. Everyone should watch it. And Liz has gone on to make a whole cottage industry about feeding creativity. And, since I went on to do other things, and travel writing, like I mentioned earlier, was such a creative rebirth for me. And then I evolved into books, and then, television writing to a degree, although anybody can really direct television. But and so what I'm saying is, since I went on and did other things that I feel internally proud of, I suppose that's what allowed me the internal space to embrace that. You know what? We can still play Born to Run. You know what I mean? I'm thrilled if you come up to me about Pretty in Pink now. Whereas for years I would just kind of go, thank you, really. Where now I'm like, yeah, right on, dude. It's awesome, isn't it? And so I think that's an internal journey that we have to make. Otherwise, you just end up to. And there's truth in that. Those are awesome. It's all part of the stew that make up who I am. And, Born to Run is, Bruce Springsteen says, I'll always play Born to Run in the show. And he's always got that, and I'd hate to go to a Bruce Springsteen show and him not to play Born to Run, even though it's not my favorite song. It's Born to Run. Come on,
So you mentioned some great films there. You said in Brat that you didn't grow up in a movie-loving home and that you only discovered the world of old Hollywood after moving to New York. Okay, that surprised me.
Oh, well, I grew up in suburban New Jersey. You didn't, you went to the movie on Friday night, and I remember seeing Jaws, and that's blowing my mind. Yes, but I don't remember other movies that you didn't. And movies weren't really, particularly like we were talking about. Movies weren't for kids then. I remember seeing The Godfather like when I was 18 and I was bored. I'm like, what? Bunch of old guys eating pasta, like shooting each other. Who cares? You know what I mean? But when I moved to New York, and there was still, this is the 1980, and there were all those great revival houses, and you could go spend the afternoon watching double features. I mean, that's my greatest education, and that's what I learned what a movie star was, and that's what I love that. To go to the movies instead of my classes at 2:00 and just sit there for at least 2 movies. What thrilling! Jimmy Stewart and Catherine Hepburn and all. My God, incredible.
There's a place in Berlin called the Babylon. It's over by Rosa Luxemburg Platz. They do Fritz Lang's Metropolis with a live orchestra regularly, but they had about 2 months ago they had a film noir kind of not a festival, but they showed a bunch of them, and for the first time I could see The Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity on the big screen, and The French Connection, we saw that as well. Just fantastic.
The French Connection again when Gene Hackman died. But yeah, The Maltese Falcon, incredible.
So you mentioned an early obsession with Montgomery Clift. Do you have any favorite directors?
Yeah, I did. I was very obsessed with Montgomery Clift when I was young. I went back recently and watched A Place in the Sun again. And it's yeah, he's great. My favorite directors, I like Francis Coppola's movies a lot. I love Claude Chabrol's movies a lot once I learned about them. Those are 2 that jump to my mind.
I like the 40s and 50s film noir. That's kind of my genre, and Billy Wilder as well.
Well, and John Huston, those, the
Yeah.
mod, all that, and Maltese Falcon, that John Huston's amazing, brother. Yeah, you certainly have to be in there. Yeah.
Next time you're in Berlin, let me know. There's a little tiny theater in Prenzlauer Berg. It's like 14, 15 seats or something like this, and they do a midnight screening of Casablanca every Saturday. That's fantastic to see that on the screen.
Yeah, with that Michael Curtiz directed that. It's terrific. But I mean, in those days, they would just directors would just shoot the movie. Like Michael Curtiz didn't edit. They would just take it and wait from him and edit it, and he would just go shoot the next one. They're real shooters that day. Like in George Stevens, who I liked a lot, but he was, Montgomery Clift said he was a great craftsman, which I watched. I just recently watched Giant again on an airplane on a long flight. And George Stevens directed that. I thought that was, and I watched it because of Jimmy Dean. And, he's a great craftsman, but was he an art? Does he raise it to the level of, I don't know. I mean, who might have said George Stevens wasn't a great director, but, movies like A Place in the Sun are spectacular,
There was something about the storytelling was different then too, right? Like it was so tight compared to now. Like you watch some of these shitty B noir, and so much is crammed into an hour and 10 minutes at the most. Some of these B films, they're much tighter, better told than those baggy 3-hour superhero films that are just special effects.
Absolutely, and I watched recently, not a B movie, but I was on a plane, and the guy next to me was watching Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, and just the camera, and I watched it without sound because my guy was just watching my neighbor's screen, and I knew exactly what the story was and where to look and what to do. It wasn't just handheld or crazy or just hosing it down and cutting. This camera was moving here, pushing it on him and telling the story visually. And that's what, like Michael Curtiz, you watch Casablanca and they're always just telling a story visually in a very simple and elegant way. Push in there, they slide over here. They're not just hosing it down the way we do so much now. And then we'll get it in the air. We'll fix it in there. We'll just make it in the air. They're making decisions on set, and the craftsmanship that's involved in that is not, but particularly now, I guess, particularly television is made by committee. They'll get me a close-up, get a close-up, and everybody's got an opinion. Whereas those guys are just sent off, go make the movie and bring it home. And so things played a lot more in one, or the camera just moved elegantly there, So you needed to be a craftsman because that's what the job was. Now, not as much, my God, they're brilliant directors, but a lot of times, for television particularly, often, you're just hosing it down, and because the writer is going to edit it later. You're not the boss. A director is not the boss of television. Everyone, you come on the set, and you think that if you were watching, you think, oh, the director, that's the guy in charge. Not at all. In television, it's the writer who's in charge. And most writers are not visual filmmakers. They want to hear their words. Did a lot of the show Orange is the New Black, and Genji Cohen, who I love, created that show. But she used to say to me, Andy, don't give me this fancy stuff. I just want to see my face and saying my word. And don't give me any of these side shots. I mean, you mean profile Genji? And we used to joke about 11, but that's what she was actively anti-cinematic. And I got it. It made complete sense for that show. When I wanted to do all this stuff, she's like, no. This is just this, and that made a lot of sense for that particular show. But and she got that in a way I didn't get it till I did get it. But a lot of writers don't understand things, so they're afraid of it. The way many directors are don't understand acting, so they're afraid of actors, so they don't talk to actors, and they just go, no. Actors, the one out there, they have to be open. John Cleese said that does a great speech about creativity and what he called the open and closed mode. When you have an open mode when you're acting and or watch as you're directing it during the tape, and then cut. You have to close up and go, okay, now, how did we feel about that? What should we do to fix that? But when you're in the throes of it, you have to be open. It's very hard to open, hard and closed all the time. Same thing with writing, I suppose, right? You have to just open that hard up, risk writing it, and then, the next day go back and look at it and go, okay, what works here, right?
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about your experience too, because you got both sides. Like I'm not visually creative at all. I mean, I can write a description of something visual, but I can't, if you told me to set up a scene or whatever and play it out physically, I wouldn't know where to start or how to draw something or whatever. But your experience has given you both sides of that. Your writing's very introspective, and then you can also see?
Well, I'm a visual person, Someone's asking me, there, are you auditory? And I'm like, because I was mentioning hearing something. I said, not at all. I'm totally visual. And when I write and I see things, I totally see it. It's visual. I play a movie in front of me, Absolutely. That's just where it came from.
You describe yourself as a shy, kind of withdrawn person, but your writing isn't like that at all. Like there's a deep vulnerability to it. It's the same vulnerability that you tapped into in films like Pretty in Pink and St. Elmo's Fire that made that so identifiable for people. Like it's really revealing and internal in a way that isn't easy to do it in person. It's much easier on the page, right?
Yeah, isn't it for everyone? I mean, you hear this often. And my daughter's 18, she asked me something about my past, my youth. And Sam, my 23-year-old son, said, Willow, if you want to know about Dad, you have to read his book. Because lots of people, and I'm not one, I remember Stephen Fry saying this. He's the one that taught me. I would write to my 15-year-old self. I heard him say that one. And I thought that was really true because I write things, and I'm sure you do too, lots of people that you would never say to somebody. It's like the idea that you're going to write it and put it out to them, this anonymous thing. But I don't know. And you have to do that if you're writing memoirs kind of things or, nonfiction, because you're asking someone to invest their time and whatnot. If you're not going to invest and give to them, then why should they, let's throw that down. I'm not here for some stories. I'm here I want to nod my head and go, I feel like that. I feel. And then you keep reading. My circumstances were entirely different, but those feelings are exactly the same. I mean, exactly what you're talking. And that you have to do that. And somehow I remember the first time I experienced it when I was writing the first book I did. And I wrote all the travel stuff that happened. And I go, but what I was feeling was this thing. And I said, well, I got to write that down. I'm like, well, that's never going to be in the book. I'm never going to take that out. I can't do that. I'm typing. I'm just going to delete this. But I'm just, and I write it down. Okay. And then I read it and I go, well, of course, the whole chapter's been leading to that paragraph. And if I don't have that, there's no chapter here. It's describing an iceberg. Who cares? It has to have that. But that when I learned that, I went, oh, well, that's what this job is now. So if I want to do that, and I realized I like that feeling. And then people would read it and they wouldn't shame me. They wouldn't go, oh, they would go, that, when you said that, when you were looking at the iceberg, I know exactly that feeling. And then, then you feel less alone in the world and they feel less alone. That's the whole point of it. It's that connection. So we're less alone.
Yeah, this travel's really interesting in that it calls up the past and calls up those long forgotten memories, your interactions with the place, just bring this stuff up. And that's such an important part of the travel experience and understanding your own trip.
Well, Paul Perutin, it's always about the travel, not the destination. Oh.
So one of the most important and most interesting parts about walking with Sam, one of the main threads is the conversations that you have with your son. So I guess I should say for the listener that you went back to walk the Camino again with your teenage son, and the conversations that you have, everything comes up from the zombie apocalypse to his recent breakup, your own divorce. Questions come up like, is anyone trustworthy? And you do such a great job of capturing the way our minds work on a long trip or a long walk. The things that are going through your head versus what comes out of your mouth. That's really vivid.
Well, I mean, when you're walking with someone, it all comes out. And, I seem to have this little niche that it's not a travel, it's like I call it like a personal trip. It's not really a memoir, but it's like a personal travel book. And it's not just a travel book. It's the first book was about my first travel book, The Longest Way Home was about coming to terms with getting married, and how do we keep our inherent solitude when you have to find intimacy with another person? How do we reconcile those two things? That's what that book is about. That book is about parenthood, and my experience of parenthood, in an environment of travel. And the book I'm writing now, I rode 10,000 miles across the country, but it's a book about male friendship. I was exploring the notion of male friendship. I went to see some old friends. It's a travelogue about America, but it's really about friendship and how to, where's that? What place did that have in my life? That book started because my son, we were joking about one of his friends, and he then, you don't really have any friends, do you, Dad? And I said, yes, Sam. I try not to be defensive. And I said, yes, Sam, I have friends. I just don't see them, but I know they're there, and that's enough. And then he left the room, and I realized, no, it's not enough. And I had these friends that were formative in my life, my early 20s, and they all moved away. So I said, I haven't seen some of these these guys in 20 years, and they were the foundation of my life. And so I went on a road trip to go see them again. And along the way, met all other men, So it's like these personal travel books. And in traveling, I figure out that's, we're all on these little odysseys, these little quests, to uncover ourselves to ourselves, answer those questions. So like talking to my son and, that was a profound experience for me. I'd always wanted to go back to the Camino again because it was so life-changing the first time, and to go with my son with the real, that was for me.
It must have been really interesting to see him reflected through the eyes of others as well. Like, did you learn anything about him that surprised you?
Sure, I learned so much, but I think what it did was help me see him more clearly, and not my projection of him, and him see me more clearly, who I was. I remember there was one moment we were walking and we were these two guys, and he went up and sort of started walking with them, and they were older, and I wanted them to like us, and I felt suddenly like, oh God, these guys don't want my kid, my 19-year-old, infringing on their talk, and how do I extricate him and bring him back so he's not embarrass us, embarrass me, and then I realized that when we got there, the guy told me that your kid's awesome, man, he's so great to walk with, and I was just like, I'm a complete self-centered, obsessed idiot. My perception of what's happening is not accurate. Things like that happen over and over, and it really helped me just like separate. My son's like me in many ways, but in many ways, he's not like me at all. And my own inherent shame that I have and fear of people and things don't apply to him. And that scrim that I put fear and shame in front of the way I view the world, those lenses I put in my glasses are not helpful. And if it's my own life, okay, I get what I sow, that's how I view things. But I shouldn't be projecting that on my kid and seeing, because then I can't see him clearly, and, I realized also on the trip how much I still, when I left home at 17 and my relationship with my dad essentially ended at that moment. We're not close after that. And didn't want that with my son, to allow him to see who I was. I wanted him to like me, I realized. And the degree to which we want someone to like us, the degree to which they can't really see us because we're compensating, we're performing or something, or that's not the right word, but we're doing. And when I realized on that trip, when you get tired because you're walking 500 miles, you just kind of stop doing that for a minute. And it's like, oh, we're just here. And that's when we could connect. And that's when my son could see me and liked me even more than consequently, as opposed to me trying to get him to like me. And I didn't even realize that's what I did with wanting him to like me, because I didn't want it to be like my father, or I didn't like my father, and he didn't like me. And I didn't, so I'm not making much sense there, but that notion of just dropping it, when my dad died, I went to see him before he died, and, we didn't solve our path. We just dropped it. I just dropped it. I don't know and I just dropped it, and I'm here and I love you. And the rest is just like behavior and shit. That's too bad, but we're here now, and to be able to sit with my son and just go, hey man. And others seeing him more clearly than me helped me illuminate that for me. Yeah.
I guess that's why walking this particular route is so life-changing. Like these lessons seem to embed physically, with each blister and mile and drop of sweats, and you just sort of drop your bullshit away, and you almost.
The Camino is great. I mean, any walking is good for that. Any kind of journey, physical journey. Walking is the natural rhythm of which we were meant to sort of do things. I mean, all the philosophers and poets and everybody talk about the value of walking, and it's all true. And, it took me, I used to think walking was just the slowest way to get anywhere. And then after my first Camino, I realized maybe walking is actually the event. And I never met anybody who walked the Camino and didn't find it a life-changing profound.
So how has it changed since your first walk?
The Camino? Well, it's certainly much more popular. When I walked it in the early 90s, there weren't very many people doing it. It started in the 8th century as the Catholic Church, the little Catholic Church in the 8th century decided that the bones of the Apostle St. James had been found in the farther and westernmost reach of the Iberian Peninsula, and anybody who walked there got half their time in purgatory knocked off. And so they came on. But really, it was about real estate. Islam had taken over Spain, and the Catholic Church wanted it back. So, while you're on your way to get your soul purged and cleansed, kick out the damn Moors. And so it became, the Crusades started, the Knights Templar and all that bloody, gory stuff. And it worked. They took back over Spain and got rid of the Moors. And so then the Camino fell out of favor. The church said, don't worry about St. James over there. It's not important anymore. So, for that century, very few people did it. And then in the mid-20th century, it started, there was one priest who kind of tried to revive it. And by the time I got there in the early 90s, it was starting to happen. But now there's a whole industry built up to support the walker. And, you still have to do the walk. But there's a lot. Now I think it's 500,000 people a year doing it. When I did it, I think there were 50,000 people. And I remember at the end, you go get your Camino certificate, which is meaningless because who cares about some piece of paper when it was, it's about the walking. And so, but the first time I remember just walking in and there was some old guy sitting there going, bueno dia. And he gave me my thing. Whereas this time there was a line out the door for, hours for people to get there.
Wow. And he said too that a lot of people just walk the last bit.
Yeah, most of them, because the church said if you walk the last 100 kilometers, you can get your documentation that you walked the Camino. Which so that's why people start in the last 100 kilometers. It's a 3-4 day walk, and that's fine. But you're not walking the Camino because you start 500 miles away. It wears you down and then builds you back up. I don't know what you get after 3 days, except maybe starting to get blisters and kind of go, I guess that was fun. And it's a beautiful part of Spain, Galicia, in the West is the most beautiful. And so it's nice, but it's not walking the Camino, which is about, attrition and grinding down and coming back up.
Yeah, particularly that bit in the middle, it sounded like.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite a trial.
Yeah. I mean, there's this whole section in the middle that there's wheat fields for days and days and days, and it's blistering hot, and you're just walking through wheat fields, and it's, known to, Don Quixote was in the southern would say they're tilting at windmills, and there's a reason, and so, but it's amazing. It's an extraordinary thing, and that's, that's the first time. That's when I had this sort of, white light experience where I sort of broke down and sobbing into tears in the middle of a wheat field. And I realized at that moment, I realized how much fear had dominated my life. And I'd never been aware of fear as a factor in my life until that moment of its first absence. You know what I mean? I suddenly felt, my wife has got all these good Irish sayings. One of them is, I felt like myself from the toes up. And that moment in the wheat field, after having sobbed and just, why do I didn't even know what I felt. I just felt too much of everything and too not enough of everything and just lost. And then I just stopped and I'm like, oh, there I am. Here I am, sitting on the fucking ground. Here I am. And that was liberating, and I'd had that feeling once before when I was 15 years old and I walked out on stage in high school play as the Artful Dodger, and I walked out and I was just like, there I am. Whoa. And I knew in that instant in my life, that was my life. And so I had never felt that again. I felt that moment in the Camino, when I had that breakdown, and I felt like, there I am. That's what started me traveling the world. Well, because I wanted more of that feeling. And then the first time I wrote something down, I was in a hotel in Saigon, and I'd spent the day with this kid who showed me around. He picked me up on his Vespa. He wouldn't leave me alone. And so I hopped on his Vespa, and he showed me all around Saigon where his, his mother attended the public garden, where his father had been arrested, the temple they used to take him. He just showed me his world. And I went back to my room and I was so buzzy after it, I didn't know what to do. And so I just grabbed a piece of paper and I wrote down what happened. Like, it wasn't a journal. It was just like, I wrote dialogue. I wrote the day. I wrote a story. This kid picked me up and dropped me off, and I wrote the story. And when I finished that, again, I felt like, there I am. I felt like myself from the toes up. And so I started writing. You know what I mean? There's 3 little tenfolds in my life that have defined my life. And the only quality I have is the ability to recognize when that happened. I was like, something just happened. Something, don't tell anyone. And I knew they were important. Like when I was 15, then I'll shut up. When I was 15, when I walked out on stage, the Artful Dodger, I knew it was profound in my life because I said, don't tell anybody. It's like a little flame's been lit and anybody walking by can just go and blow it out, which would have happened. When I told my parents 2 years later that I wanted to go to college and be an actor, my father said, no son of mine's going to be a fucking thespian. And we know what that means, right? So I realized, I was right not to say anything. But by then I'd already decided. But if I'd said that right away, that would have been shut down. I would have gone, oh yeah, okay, you're right.
That's part of the problem I have with diary keeping as well, I think, is revealing that sort of thing. Like, I never told anybody I wanted to write. Not for years, not for decades. I just did it on my own quietly. Because you know somebody can crush that so easily.
Absolutely. And I don't think we should even tell ourselves. Just let it do its thing, and it'll assert itself if it's, just pay attention to it, but don't, it's like when I'm traveling, I'm sure you're, don't write too soon. Don't start writing too soon. Just take the notes and let them do their thing. Don't start writing too soon. I think that requires trust. John Cleese, again, talking about Monty Python, and someone said, how come you always wrote the best stuff? And he said, well, I didn't write the best stuff, but I was willing to sit in the unknown and the uncomfortability of not knowing longer than most. Everybody was super facile and fast and clever, and so they would just grab at stuff and grab and do it. And I was willing to go, maybe, and just sit with the uncomfortability for longer than most people. And when I heard that, I was okay, put that one in the pocket. That made real sense.
Yeah, that's like showing up to a place and you got an assignment and you just wait for the story to come and just trust yourself that it will come. Eventually you get that after a while. With having done it a few times, you can trust yourself to go to a place and just wait and watch and let the story reveal itself rather than impose yours on it.
Yeah, it took me a long time to do that. For a long time, I would have the story beforehand and then go look for proof of it. I did a story about black pearls in Tahiti, and I knew the story was going to end with me plucking a black pearl. So I called up all these guys in Tahiti, pearl farmers, till I found one who would let me do that. And then I got on the plane. Then I pitched the story because I knew this is the story. And I wouldn't have trusted myself to just go and let serendipity happen. I would plan maybe 20, 30% and have 10 poles I could swing to, and let the trust that the rest was going to fill in. But I knew, particularly Quest's story, the only one that really got away with Quest and didn't find it was Peter Matheson, in the snow leopard. The rest, I think if you're going to go find it, search for something, you better find it. In magazine articles anyway. I didn't trust like you did for a long time. Now I do. Like I'm going up to the west of Ireland to do a story tomorrow, and my wife said, "What are you writing about?" And I was like, "I have no idea. I have no idea. We'll figure something out." So I guess somewhere along the line that's happened.
I find if I read enough around something, fill my head with enough little threads of history or culture or places that seem interesting, a writer that used to live there or something, I put that stuff in my head and then just let it turn around by itself and then go to the place and then wait and see where the story pops up. But having that kind of preparation of reading in the background is helpful for me.
Well, I think when you did preparation, it's everything, and in acting too, and in directing too, it's preparation. And then you just throw it out. If you prepare and and then just forget about it. And what it's meant to stay in profit, suddenly it's there. And it's like, oh, what was the quote that so-and-so said? And you go find that stuff. But I do think you have to prepare. And then you have to, that's when you get enough technique or enough experience that you can go, now just drop it all and go be present in what happens. Yeah, I think you're absolutely.
So you said with the Camino, the first half of the walk was isolating, but somewhere around the halfway point, you start to accrue a community. And it's a bit of for an introvert, that must be a bit of a tug of war between solitude and intimacy, something like what you described in your first book, that you're constantly traveling with people by the second half, but at the same time, you want to pull back and get a bit of space of your own. But how do you balance that out?
Well, not very well. I would always, when walking, I would always walk alone or walk with Sam and then meet people, in the evening for dinner. But, that's always the challenge for me in my life is, breaking through, the solitude is indispensable. And, again, Paul talked about the lucidity of loneliness. And that's what a beautiful phrase, lucidity of loneliness. I love that. And I nurture that. But at a certain point, it begins to kind of crust over and become isolation. And the longer you're in isolation, the harder it is to break that. So it's finding that balance of that, and I can tend toward that, justify the lucidity of loneliness becoming isolation and think I'm doing that. I find another bullshit. This is just fear and indulgence, and, you have to now take it out. But that's my old challenge. Other people go right to community and lots of people around, and they're like afraid to just sit with themselves. I'm the other way.
Yeah, that's exactly the balance that's what I have trouble with.
Me too.
I'm easy to fall into that. that isolation part, and then the longer you stay in there, as you say, it's harder to break out of it.
For sure.
But you've got so many memorable characters that come up along the way of your journey. Like, I don't want to spoil it for the reader, but one of my favorites was at a makeshift cafe on the way to Lyon. You're getting a coffee at this little rundown place, and everything seems to be going okay until the proprietor says, "How was your Camino? What are you discovering within yourself?" And then it just goes downhill from there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking about this the other day, but Joe takes, I think, one of the dangers that we all do so much, and I try to just stop taking score all the time. And particularly on the Camino, it's a big topic of like, what do you know? And it's like, it took me years for things to come clear about what I learned the first time. Things that are of real value, easy things that come up. Oh, sure, that's what that is. Okay, fine. But the deep, true, rich things that you're going to really get to things take a long time to rise up, So, but yeah, that lady, that was terrifying, and we were trapped. And, it's one of those things in life where you kind of go, oh, no, it's awful. But the writer in you is going, oh, this is gold,
Exactly right. Yeah. Well, when she said, she started going on and on, I got the book here. She started going on and on about some graciousness and generosity. It binds you to the guiding force within the universe. And then you ask for like a second pat of butter, and she flips out. I can't just give it away.
Exactly. I mean, but that's human. That's people right there, and it's like, it's funny. And
So was it physically harder this time around compared to the first time you did it? Like, I'm 52 now, and I'm getting ready to go on a big hike, and I'm increasingly conscious of this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my son was 19, and he was, every day in the afternoon, he would just bolt ahead of me and wait for me in town. And I'm like, I'll be there. That was great because we'd have time to chat in the morning, and then I'd have some quiet time in the afternoon. But yeah, physically, I found it.
Just the daily grind, the accumulation of miles.
Yeah. When we were also walking in August, and I couldn't get my son out of, I'm up because I'm old. I'm 62 now. I walked when we were 59. And, I'm up at dawn, whether I like it or not. And I'm ready to walk. And I'd have to drag his ass out of bed. He'd sleep till the crack of noon, So he's fine walking at 3, 4 in the afternoon when it's blistering hot in the Spanish sun, where that'd be, I'll walk from 6 to noon and be done. But I had my druthers, and it's a lot cooler. But yeah, I mean, I just found it physically hard. But great, by the end, there's a moment there, they're in the middle there where it's like, wow, am I going to make it? And then by the end, bring it on. And I'd love to go again.
So I think I heard you say on an interview with Ralph Potts that Sam did go again.
Sam's been twice more.
Twice more.
Twice more. He went into the Norte, and then he went again last year to the Francais. And he was just talking to me yesterday about it. I think I might do the Camino again.
Wow.
And it was a real life changer. It was a real I said, you don't, Sammy, okay, go do whatever you like, but you don't want to be one of those Camino junkies. There are certain people that walk it 30 times, like, dude, what's going on? But I get it. I totally get it. And it took me 25 years to get back, but since then I've been like, I'll go again. Sure.
Well, I happen to have trouble relating to people born, after the internet era, or to younger people. So you always hear about generation gap and how impossible it is for the old to understand the young. But it reassured me to learn that Sam and I share a common enemy, because he said if I had a day of no consequences, I'd just walk around and kill roosters.
That's because he's trying to sleep in the morning when I'm trying. The roosters are all going every day. Yeah. Like, that was ridiculous. Yeah.
Some good lines in the book. So my last question, what's next for you? You said you're traveling tomorrow, but the new book, it sounds like, is on the horizon.
Yeah. So I just am finishing that up. This book about male friendship, the journey I took across the country, which was interesting too, because I drove, and I made I just decided not to drive on any of the interstates in America. So I drove all back roads across America, which was, because otherwise, you can zip across America and never have any contact with anyone. And the whole book is about contact, and talking to people, talking to men, particularly about that. I initially, it was a book about male friendship, going to see my friends, several of my friends. But I started talking to men all across the country, retired cops in Ohio, and blues musicians in Mississippi, and oil rig workers in Texas. And, I would go up to people. At the beginning, I didn't say what I was doing, but then eventually I just kind of, I got tired. I said, Because I'm writing a book about male friendship. We talk to me, they all can. But every single one of them did. Yeah, sure. And invariably, people would, I've never talked to them. Guys just don't talk about it. I would talk to these two retired cops in Ohio, and I'll stop. In their 70s. They've been friends since they were 10 years old. 60 years, they've been best friends, inseparable. And they're like, and I met them in an Arby's or some kind of, fast food joint. And they'd never talked about it. This is the first time we've ever talked about our friendship. We see each other every day. For 60 years, we've never talked about our friendship. I feel, to everybody invariably, it's like, I just never. I think so. And it's interesting because guys are funny, and they're afraid, the short of it is, they're afraid of intimacy. Because intimacy means homosexuality, and that scares some men. And they're afraid of vulnerability because vulnerability equates to weak. And the one thing a man can't be is weak. And so that's really limiting. That really limits them, And it's fascinating to talk to people about it. And I learned so much, I learned so much about myself and my own relationship to my friend. So anyway, so I'm finishing up that book, and that'll come out at the beginning of next year.
Oh, God, I'm really looking forward to that. My old friends, my old high school friends are still my closest friends, so I'll be very interested to read this.
Yeah, those friends are unlike, when we were talking earlier about the movies, about, those moments. It's such a formative, bonding time, and, and they know you. These guys know me. And, and it's like everyone always says, it's like no time had passed. I haven't seen them in X amount of years, and it's like yesterday.
Yeah.
And very few people that is like, and I really realized I've been doing not only myself a disservice, but my children a disservice as a parent by not being actively engaged with my friends. Because kids, of course, don't listen. They only model behavior, and they see, and I really realized that was a real fault of my parenting by not actively having my friends in my life. And when I was done, I was talking, a friend of mine called me up who I'd gotten me back in touch with. And we were laughing, and my son said, to mirror the beginning where he said, you don't really have any friends. At the end, it's so nice to see you talking to your friends again, Dad. It's such a nice smile on your face now. And it's like, you just feel safe with it. I didn't realize how unsafe I felt. I'm a parent, I've got jobs, I've got mortgages, I've got my mother in the hospital. We got that stuff that you get when you're grown up. And to just have a friend, it's just really just
yeah. There's something about those friends that you grew up with that knew your family, knew your past, knew the same place. You came from the same place. There's no pretensions. Like, you don't have to be anybody else with those people. You just
think about it. You just there. That's obvious, and everyone always says it, but it was news to me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the book. Thank you for your time today, Andrew. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Personal Landscapes. If you like the podcast, please give it a rating on iTunes and subscribe through your favorite app. You can find links to today's podcast and more conversations on Books About Place at ryanmurdoch.com. You'll also find a donate button if you'd like to contribute to the costs of the show. All donations are greatly appreciated.